Larry Sabato is the director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics and editor of A Return to Normalcy, the 2020 election that almost broke America. He joins us now from Charlottesville, Virginia. Larry, great to see you. Let's first talk about that NBC interview where Trump said there are methods for seeking a third term. And then he added that he's not joking. This topic of a third term has come up before with him. At a January rally in Nevada, he said the following. Listen.
It will be the greatest honor of my life to serve not once, but twice, or 3 times, or 4 times.
Now, to be clear, that would be unconstitutional, Larry, but could it happen?
Theoretically, it could happen. It's hard to see how Trump would be able to get away with it when you really look at the options. A constitutional amendment would be the way to do it, and that is an impossibility. You'd have to have both parties coming together to agree to change the 22nd Amendment, which limits presidents to 2 elective terms. That isn't going to happen. There isn't a Democrat out there who would support that. But there are ways for Trump to do it. And as he said, he's not joking. And one way, I'm sorry to say, is simply to ignore the Constitution. All he really needs is for the Republican Party to nominate him for president again, and then he would maneuver to win the general election. There are ways for him to do that as well. And the Constitution may say one thing, but he may determine that he's going to get a third term regardless. Now, I don't think it's very likely. But we've learned to take him seriously when he repeats things like this over and over. And his key supporters are also talking about it.
All right. And there's so much to talk about here. Let's move on to tariffs if we can, because Trump cast April 2nd as, quote, Liberation Day, promising reciprocal tariffs on an unspecified number of countries, as well as 25% tariffs on automobiles and car parts. And he said this about the possibility of auto tariffs raising prices. He said, I couldn't care less. I hope they raise their prices, because if they do, people are going to buy American-made cars, and we have plenty. Now, to be clear, an aide later clarified that he was speaking specifically to the cost of foreign cars. But Larry, Trump promised to lower prices day one. What's the payoff here?
Well, the payoff may be for Democrats, frankly, because Trump seems bound and determined to use tariffs and to make them relatively high, and in such a way that Americans will end up paying a great deal more for many different goods and services. So inevitably, people are going to feel pain. And when they feel pain, they blame the incumbent president. Now, he blames Biden for everything, but I think we're coming to the end of the period when that sells, unless to his hardcore. But beyond the hardcore, most people aren't going to take that as legitimate. So I think he will suffer for it. I think Americans will suffer for it. Or maybe he'll rewrite the whole book on tariffs. Maybe he knows something no one else does.
Well, let's move on to Putin, because it was pretty notable and remarkable, the tone that Trump struck regarding Putin, saying that he was pissed off at Putin for going after Ukraine's president, his credibility, for calling for new leadership in Ukraine. Trump is also considering new tariffs on Russian oil. But Larry, the U.S. has not imported any Russian energy since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. So how does this make any sense?
I think what Trump is doing is sending Putin a message that Putin is also in his crosshairs. It isn't just Zelensky in Ukraine. Now, whether he follows through on this threat or any other threat against Russia is another question. He certainly hasn't been anything but friendly to Putin to this point. Maybe this rhetorically is to balance things, and maybe it's to get Zelensky to see that he's serious about making Russia comply with his ideas as well. But we'll all believe it when we see it, because so far it seems that it's been much more difficult for Zelensky in Ukraine than it has been for Russia and Putin.
Right. Let's shift to Wisconsin now, a battleground state where there is this high-stakes state Supreme Court race there that is just smashing fundraising records. And many believe that the results of this race could actually be a referendum on Elon Musk's influence on American politics and even perhaps on Trump's second term. How do you see it?
Well, if you ever wanted an argument against judicial elections, this is it. A lot of us feel it is absurd to be electing judges. They should be appointed by governors, ratified by legislatures, much as they are at the national level. But essentially, this one seat in Wisconsin is the swing seat. It will determine whether liberals or conservatives control the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And Wisconsin, of course, is the fulcrum state. It's the key swing state. So it's very important, which is why according to some reports, Elon Musk is spending somewhere around $20 million just on the election. Plus, he's offering million-dollar gifts to a couple of people who back his petition to have this kind of election. But we'll see what the public thinks about this. They may be turned off by this massive amount of money that Elon Musk is contributing and that others are contributing on the other side. It's really quite obscene.
Yeah, and when it comes to Wisconsin, it's also important to note that back in 2020, Trump lost it by a very thin margin. He filed 4 lawsuits contesting the election results, and all 4 of them ended up at the state Supreme Court. Larry Sabato, really appreciate your time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel.